Today I'm speaking with Ms. Abigail Shrier, who is a writer for the Wall Street Journal and the author of a recent book, which was named by The Economist as one of the notable books of 2020, Irreversible Damage: The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. Thanks for agreeing to talk to me today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So, why did you write the book?
I wrote the book because a woman wrote to me. I had written a piece for the Wall Street Journal on transgender pronoun laws that we have in New York and California now that assign criminal and civil penalties for failing to use someone's preferred pronoun. And I pointed out that these laws are straightforwardly unconstitutional in the United States. And a reader wrote to me, she read this and she said, maybe you'll take up my issue, but I'm a mom. My daughter had no symptoms of gender dysphoria throughout, her growing up, but the gender dysphoria being the severe discomfort in one's biological sex. But she went off to college. She had a lot of mental health problems, and she went off to college, and with a group of girlfriends, they all decided they were transgender, and she started a course of testosterone. And I've had this problem. There are now an epidemic of these young girls who are in a lot of very real pain, deciding that gender must be their problem and very quickly obtaining hormones and surgeries. And she told me that no journalist would take it up. She had written to many journalists, and I tried to find her an investigative journalist who would write about this or at least investigate it. And when I was unable to find one, I finally, 3 months later, I got back in touch with her. I said, all right, I'll look into it.
And so you claim in the book that this is a epidemic. And one of the things I'm wondering about is what relevant stats do you have at your disposal? And why language like that?
Well, I actually asked a bunch of, I conducted nearly 200 interviews for the book. And I actually asked a lot of scientists once I had some numbers, what do you call this? What is it when we have a 100-year diagnostic history of gender dysphoria, and it always afflicted boys and men. Okay. And now for the very first time in the last decade, there has been a giant surge in a different population claiming to be gender dysphoric. It has shifted from onset in young boys and to teenage girls with no childhood history, and it's shifted from men to women. So I asked them, when you have a demographic jump, and all of a sudden they are, as these teenage girls now, the leading demographic. So these are girls who, as a population, experienced virtually no gender dysphoria throughout history, suddenly being the leading demographic. I would ask them, what do you call that? Is there a scientific term for this? And they would always say, yes, epidemic.
Mm-hmm. So I'd asked you a little bit earlier about numbers. Do you have any sense of how prevalent this is? And also I'm interested in, and I'm sure the listeners, watchers would be as well, rate of increase.
Sure. So in America, it's a little harder to look at, to come up with these numbers, although I'll tell you the numbers that I do know. Okay. It's harder because we don't have centralized medical care like they do in Britain. In Britain, where they have centralized medical care, they can tell you that the number of young women being referred for gender treatment has exploded over 4,000% in the last decade. Okay. In America, we don't have centralized medical care, and you don't even need a diagnosis of gender dysphoria to start treatment. You can start a course of testosterone without ever having received a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So they're a little harder to come by, but here's what I can tell you. In 2018, 2% of high school students said they were transgender. So that's 2 in 100 kids. That's an enormous increase over what was historically the rate of gender dysphoria in the population, which was 0.01%. So 1 in 10,000 people went from roughly 1 in 10,000 people to 2 in 100 high school students. We also know that between 2016 and 2017, the number of females requesting gendered surgery in the United States quadrupled. So we know these are the exploding rates. And then, of course, I've interviewed many therapists, and Lisa Littman of Brown University did her survey. And when you talk to therapists, when you talk to parents, you get the same thing over and over. And that is that the leading demographic asking for gender transition is teenage girls with no childhood history of gender dysphoria.